What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There is a quiet but unmistakable shift happening inside Russia right now. You don't hear it from the official statements and you do not see it on state television. But if you look closely at the conversations happening online, especially among pro-war Telegram channels, you notice, you just cannot miss it, a growing unease. These are the people who once confidently predicted a swift victory, who posted invasion maps with proud arrows, we're going here, we're attacking there, who mocked Ukraine and believed that Russia's military strength was overwhelming. Now, they write anxious messages late at night, speculating about the next wave of mobilization, using VPNs because what if they get caught or whatever, and then sharing rumors from sources who claim that the Russian military commandment is preparing for another draft. The reason is simple. The current manpower is no longer enough to maintain the offensive. The army is losing more soldiers than it can possibly replace through contract recruitment and bonuses. The war has reached a stage where every additional meter of land comes at a brutal human and monetary cost. The advances are small, if any. The losses are massive. And the promise of a breakthrough that Putin relied on for political leverage is fading. So today, let's talk about what Putin tried to achieve, why it did not work, why mobilization is back on the table, and how he is trapped in a lose-lose situation that offers him absolutely no escape. When Putin prepared the summer and fall offensive, it was not simply about gaining territory. It was meant to reshape the political landscape. Pay attention, this is very important. His plan was to deliver a symbolic, undeniable victory, something large enough to convince the world that Ukraine's defeat was a matter of time. The idea was straightforward. Push Ukrainian defenses hard enough to seize key parts of the Donetsk region, raise the Russian flags here and there, and declare that the operation was a success. This would allow the Kremlin to enter future negotiations from a position of strength, potentially forcing Ukraine and its allies to make concessions. According to various leaks and insider discussions, there was even a belief inside the Russian circle that this achievement needed to happen before the political storm of the upcoming US elections, whenever they reach their peak, and, well, the rest is history, obviously. The Kremlin assumed that if Russia could show visible progress on the battlefield, Donald Trump and his allies would view supporting Ukraine as a hopeless investment. And there is nothing worse for Trump than to lose money, according to him. And obviously this would basically encourage them to withdraw assistance or pressure Ukraine into accepting unfavorable terms. It was a strategy built on perception, not reality. And as you just saw once again yourself, the entire idea of offensive was just to make Russia appear stronger. It was not about winning the war, invading Kyiv or taking Zelensky hostage. They knew they could not win, so they did not even try. But the illusion of continued fighting still had to be maintained. And for that, they had to pay with human lives, to pay for a project with no clear end in sight. But reality is stubborn. It does not favor neither Russia nor Ukraine, it is just that, reality. Russia's army did not collapse, it is large and it is still kinda capable of offensive. But every kilometer forward demands dozens, sometimes hundreds of lives. The idea of a sweeping, elegant breakthrough like the early days of February 2022 became impossible. Instead, the offensive turned into a slow grind, characterized by mass infantry assaults, relentless artillery exchanges, drone-guided strikes, and constant rotation of exhausted troops. What's worse for the Kremlin, none of this resulted in the decisive victory they needed. The gains were marginal, minimal, if any at all. Villages that once had 500 residents now only had 5 ruined houses, the rest is just completely destroyed. Squares of land that look impressive on paper change nothing strategically. The Russian offensive became a demonstration of its own limitations. It spent strength without gaining leverage. And as fall approached, it became clear that the window of this opportunity was closing. Time was no longer working for Russia, it was working against it. The easiest solution was to pour money on this problem, as it almost always is. That is exactly what the Kremlin did when the partial mobilization did not go as planned. So they decided to just buy men instead. Did it work? Was it sustainable? Can they keep doing it? Let's answer those questions in our next chapter. To sustain the offensive, the Kremlin relied heavily on contract recruitment and the promise of money. Huge banners appeared across Russian cities, offering unbelievably high signing bonuses, television ads portrayed enlistment as a chance for financial rebirth, a way to escape debt, buy an apartment, or provide for the family for eternity. The war was marked not as a patriotic duty, but as a business opportunity. And initially, this approach delivered results, as we all seen. Tens of thousands of men joined, driven not by ideology, but by necessity. Many were burdened with loans, incomplete education, or unsustainable or unstable employment. The promise of several million rubles just for a signature seemed like a lifeline, like you just won a jackpot. In a country where economic mobility has been stagnating for years, people will grasp at anything that looks like a chance to start over. However, the longer the war dragged on, the more horror stories began circulating. Families complained that payments arrived late or not at all. Soldiers described commanders demanding bribes not to be sent to meet assaults. It is this classic "you can either give me money now or you die and I will take your money" kind of situation. So obviously those soldiers had simply no choice. Others discovered that contracts were almost impossible to terminate, effectively trapping them in this circle of suffering indefinitely. And most devastatingly, people saw their friends and neighbors returning not as heroes, but if returning at all, sealed in tin coffins. It did not take long for the illusion to break. Once the reality of death, unpaid wages, and endless service became widely known, recruitment stalled dramatically. The same advertisements that once felt tempting now feel almost predatory. Even those who are financially desperate understand that signing a contract today is not a chance for prosperity, but a near guaranteed ticket to an early grave. Money stopped being an incentive when people realized there might be no one left alive to even spend it. With that realization came the desperation phase. For everyone, for military, for people, and even for the Kremlin itself. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. As recruitment numbers declined, the state shifted tactics. What began as voluntary contract enlistment gradually transformed to a more coercive system. First came the pressure campaigns, visits from the enlistment officers, phone calls, letters urging men to update their records, you know the kind of stuff, right? Then came targeted summons at workplaces, government offices, and subway stations. Eventually, the situation escalated into outright detentions. Men were stopped in public places and forced to sign documents they'd never understood, which were military contracts. Those who resisted were threatened with criminal charges. Those who tried to leave the country were blocked at the border. What the Kremlin hoped to avoid, which is another open mobilization, slowly started happening, just without the official announcement, at least not yet. A silent mobilization, dispersed and disguised, designed to avoid triggering mass panic or protests. But even this approach reached its limit. You cannot sustain a war of attrition by dragging men off the streets one by one. Eventually families start talking, and now it's not just one, it's dozens of families aware of what's happening. Dozens become hundreds, hundreds become thousands, and just right before you know it, the entire settlement knows that the real nature of these forced recruitments, if you can even call them this way. The losses are too great, the front line's too long, and the pressure is too high. The military leadership understands that the current system is simply not enough. If the army fails to achieve significant territorial gains by the end of the year, a large-scale mobilization will become unavoidable. The pro-war community online is already preparing mentally for it. The government is simply delaying the announcement for as long as possible, hoping that the public remains calm and the backlash is kind of manageable. They wait for that exact moment when people themselves will expect the mobilization to happen. This is something what more or less did happen back in fall 2022. And when it does, all Kremlin has to declare is that it was unavoidable, necessary, and expected. And I mean, they would not even lie, for the first time in many years. This brings us to the most important point of them all. Putin is now stuck between two catastrophic decisions. If he decides not to mobilize, the Russian army will continue to suffer heavy losses without receiving the necessary reinforcements. Over time, the front lines will weaken, strategic positions will become vulnerable, and Ukraine will most likely regain the initiative. Meanwhile, the economy will continue to bleed. Russia's entire industrial structure has already shifted to war footing, as they call it. And this system only functions for as long as the war continues and the army keeps absorbing the manpower. If the war stops flowing through the economy, as we discussed many times in the past, the economy collapses under its own weight. Factories already have been repurposed, budgets have been reallocated, social spending has been cut to minimum to still maintain ammunition production, supply chains, all this kind of stuff. Without mobilization, the war ends in defeat, and defeat means political collapse. But if Putin decides to mobilize, he risks a very different crisis. People remember the last mobilization. They remember panic, protests, blocked borders, men sleeping in airports, wives begging for their husbands not to leave, and then entire regions emptying overnight. This time the reaction might and most likely will be even stronger. The Russian government hopes that society has grown numb, however, that outrage will be short-lived and that fear will return quickly, which, unfortunately, historically, is not an unreasonable expectation. Protest movements in Russia tend to surge and then just disappear just as quickly. If mobilization happens again, it will replenish the ranks, without a doubt. It will prolong the war, it will buy time, but it will not solve anything. It will simply delay the inevitable breakdown and increase the number of people who suffer along the way. And believe it or not, there is a third option, which is to simply end the war. Declare that objectives have been achieved, withdraw forces, redirect resources to domestic recovery, and to prevent further loss of life. Kinda makes sense, right? This is the most logical, least destructive solution. Well, but Putin has never chosen the easiest path. He prefers the hardest possible route, the one that demands sacrifice, suffering, and loyalty, just like our grandfathers did. The one where he never admits also failure. So instead of ending war, he will likely prolong it, even if doing so leads to the country into deeper economic decay, even greater demographic and economic collapse, and much harsher reckoning later. Russia now finds itself in a situation where every choice leads to loss. The offensive has stalled, the manpower is running out, the economy is cracking, and the public patience is thinning. The illusions that once held everything together, the illusion of quick victory, prosperity through war, of control, all of these are dissolving. What remains is the quiet understanding that the war cannot continue endlessly, and yet cannot end without consequences. Putin's regime is trying to navigate between these two realities, but time is no longer on his side. The longer this continues, the sharper the consequences will be. And at some point, Russia will face a moment where the question is no longer how to win, but how to survive what comes after. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, the absolutely best way to do it is through Patreon memberships. The link is down below. There is an additional chapter at the end. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are resolve they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe